it look like? And we're up. We are officially streaming.
All right.
Hey, welcome. Boom, boom, boom. Let me bring this up. People. Oh, Susan dropped out. Can anybody see? Is there anybody sitting in the lobby or anything like that? Sorry.
How can you tell?
I'm not entirely sure. Add people. I think I just checked, and that is not the case.
Okay.
So Susan will be back when she gets back. Welcome to the show, everybody. Thanks for checking in. Do you want to kick us off, Mac?
Sure. Welcome to the Workshop Show. This is my co-host with me, Daniel Andrew Boyd, and he spent the last week delving deeply through his extensive experience with the craft of storytelling and come up with a dynamite lesson plan for today's workshop.
And this is my co-host, Mac McDavid, and he is a real lover of storytelling. And together, we're gonna sort of lead you through how this show is gonna look.
Okay. So we are the Workshop Show because we believe that your ever-changing stories will continue to evolve as you grow in personal insight, maybe even as you grow in wisdom. This is how our show is going to go tonight. Dan starts pulling us together for a 15 or 20-minute lesson right at the top of the show. And then we'll go into the stories. This is our differentiator between other workshops that you can go to. We spend an hour and a half diving deeply into the two stories that you're going to hear tonight. We'll offer and receive feedback from the storytellers. This kind of close reading allows us to act like a director would. We'll ask the storytellers to immediately tell their story again, trying out a new version. This way we can see in real time how our feedback works. Did we communicate it effectively? Did the changes make the story better? Make it worse? Did we get closer to the heart of the story?
Awesome. One of the things to think about in terms of when we're doing this criticism is that we are doing constructive criticism. All of us in here are friends, and we're all adults. We all know each other. We're never critiquing the person. We're always talking about the story, and our goal is always to make the story better in the way that the person wants it to be. And we're trying to get to that most important thing, and we're trying to do that with the people. So if it comes across as harsh, it never is. We're never judging the person, and all of us are adults and friends, and it's all in good nature.
So to make all this happen, this is what's going to go down. Each of the two tellers will get to tell their story either 2 or 3 times. We end the show by having one of the people who didn't tell a story retell one of the stories they heard on the show from the first person perspective, as though they had lived through the original storyteller's experience. This is really quite unique in the storytelling world. How come we do this? One is it can be extremely validating to have someone really hear you and to see someone else attempt to embody your experience that you just told the story about. So it's very special for the original teller. And number 2, for the audience, you get to see very concretely what it means when we talk about voice, each storyteller having a voice. You'll see just how much voice changes a story, how perspective shifts, tone shifts, something unique that's almost undescribable. You get a rare chance we'll go into the story. Influence of this voice. This is our differentiator between other workshops.
That's awesome.
When do some
Yeah. No, I think that the only thing I have is to start with the lesson, and then we'll do introductions. Yep. Um. So today I was in a workshop where people were thinking about entering the next moth. And so I thought we would do a little brainstorming together. The theme is courage. And I just want, right off the top, does anybody have thoughts about that in general? And I'll give you like a little bit more so I'm not putting people on spot. But I think that it can be difficult to tell stories where you're the hero. When you go up on stage and you talk about how great you are and how cool the thing is that you did and nobody else would have done it, it's sort of hard to get people on your side. And so, what are angles at talking about courageous things that you've done that might help circumvent coming off like you're pompous and telling everybody you're great? Yeah, I think that's a good point. That you can tell a story about a time where you were brave, and it will help a lot just to put in somewhere, I'm not always like this. There's little tiny, and it can just be one sentence to help humanize you. Uh, can go a lot of times can go a long way. Off of this topic, I'm gonna go into a list of courageous things that people came up with. One, in this other workshop that I was doing with this guy Sean, who runs it, who has a fantastic group called Grit, GRIT. You can find them on Facebook, and also they have a podcast that's a ton of fun. And they listen to one story, and then they talk about a theme and talk about how the story relates to that theme. And it's a really good deep dive kind of podcast into storytelling. So things that they came up with right off the bat was that when you're doing these sorts of themed storytelling shows, one important thing to remember is if your story's good, the theme doesn't really matter. A good story is there's tons of times where people win moths, win, whatever sort of story slam type thing. And they just came out with a stellar story, and it's the one that sticks in the audience's mind. And so they're like, I don't care that was off of theme. You'll find it's a little different places, but definitely for the moth, if you just brush that theme, that's all people care about. So you can do the reverse theme if you just talk about cowardice. You can do that, a time you wish you were brave, a time you wish you had courage. Another spin is talking about other people being courageous in your life, people who have inspired you, people who have protected you. that's a good one. And now I'll open it up to other people to jump on and say some ideas about what are some different angles you could come at that aren't stories about you being a superhero. Yeah, that's great. Right, right. Uh yeah, and that is another one where that's the whole sort of twist on that story is that he had courage the entire time and just didn't realize it. And I think that that is a very good twist on this that people would be interested in, where you're talking and sort of touches on all these things, where you're talking about being scared or being nervous about something, and the end reveal is you have this realization. That's what bravery is. Me doing it even though I'm scared. If you're, as Kamaria pointed out, if you're doing things that you aren't scared of, that's not brave. The kid who has no fear of heights jumping off the high dive, not brave. But the kid who has been going up week after week and then turning around at the last minute, finally getting up there, that's brave. And that's really one of the important elements to what they're looking for in these moth stories are that moment of change. What is that? So, you want to be looking for stories where you weren't brave and then you were. I mean, that's a really good place because that fulcrum of change is specific, and it's probably pretty easy once you start thinking about it to start that story at the inciting incident. I think that those sorts of stories fit really well. Uh, another right. Uh yeah, that's a good one. Somebody mentioned this afternoon, and they said tiny courages. A lot of times people think about the big things, and it's like, what are the little ones that you can just craft into a story? T- Tiny stories where you can stay in one moment are good for these sorts of events because it's hard to take people on epic journeys in a 5-minute span. Hard to hold all that. And also, when you go tiny, it becomes more and more universal. So, a tiny courage, it could be anything. You could think about things that, what gives you anxiety that you don't think does for anybody else. I brought up that public speaking, there's a lot of people who have that in general, and that's one that I don't. So I would think of that as sort of a tiny one if somebody was telling that story. Uh, but I think there's other little things, stories about depression and like getting up in the morning can be a tiny courage. Uh, Doing those, if you're really in a dark place, figuring out the path to doing the basic self care stuff. Uh, Example of a tiny courage. Yeah, yeah. I think those are really relatable. Um, then another idea that was mine is you can talk about the opposite, where times where you were sort of a villain and you got thwarted by someone. Uh, there's all these times, and it can play off of that like foolhardiness too. It might be something like that, but I think we often learn lessons and change when somebody important to us points out that we've been wrong. And maybe it doesn't dawn on us in that moment, but a day or a week later, and it's like, oh, that's why that person's my friend. And that's why I need that connection. I think that there's stories around that. Uh and the final one that I wrote down that people brought up was the idea of mountain out of a molehill. And they're like, sometimes you think, right? There's that twist. You think it's gonna be this horrible thing and you need all this bravery, and then you do it and you're like, oh no, jumping off the diving board is really simple. I shouldn't have been. And you can delve into those sorts of anxieties and talk about them. Uh, this discussion, has anybody come up with ideas out of their own lives about courage stories that they think they could hit? And not to tell this. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, no, that's a great one. Yeah, I'm just looking for like the germ of an idea, and just like the log line, or the just little snippet of this is what the story would be. Oh, I've got a story about courage, and you know whatever it is. That's great. Yeah, that is a solid. Uh, yeah, that I had a semi similar one where I was like, if you don't bother the bee won't bother you. And I was eating lunch at this camp, and all these kids were like, that's a myth. That's a myth. And I was like, I've never been stung by a bee, and a bee has never hurt me. And the entire time I'm giving this ridiculous speech about how bees and I are one with each other. This bee is just crawling all over my face. And then he crawls down onto my eye, and I blink, and he stings me. That was the end of camp. Oh, thank you.
Or just whatever. But I
No,
do
I
apologize
fixed it.
for cutting you off. Okay.
Susan, start that over again.
Yeah.
Okay, so you talking made me think about changing myself, and I remember like two incidents, and one was my ex-husband and I were having an argument, and he was like, you don't want to do this, or we don't want to do this, or something, and I was just like, no, I do. And I like didn't change at all. And then I had a friend who I got really upset at, and he was like, hey, that really hurt me. And I was just like, yeah, that was the point. And he's like, I would never, ever purposely ever want to hurt you. And I was just like, what? Like, I don't think it ever dawned on me that there'd be somebody on the planet who ever wanted to hurt me. So now I am trying, like, since that one, trying so much harder not to hurt people on purpose. So I'm not sure if I've accomplished it, but at least it's now in my head. Where before I was like, no, you hurt me. You're down.
TJ, I think that your story from a couple weeks ago is kind of a bravery story with your friend. Who risked running out into the snow to save you guys.
Mm-hmm.
That was a courageous act.
Yeah. Nope.
Yeah, my story is more about a friend because she called me and another coworker at work to say, come get her. She was leaving her abusive boyfriend and she could only take what was in her arms while he was away. I was like, this is the bravest stuff I've ever seen.
Hey, Noah, you are on mute. Are you with us?
I'm here. I'm out in the
Welcome.
wilderness because it is the solstice.
Spooky story time.
Oh.
Yes, yes. Happy solstice, everybody. Happy conjunction.
So in terms of courage, though, my friend David tells me the one defining feature of my life is that I'm a courage. That I'm a coward, not a courage, a coward. So I'd say all my stories would be when someone has convinced me that I should be courageous. Just thinking back, that's all I could think about. Like peer pressure or a mentor or a friend just giving me their courage.
All right. Well, I think I am going to throw up this link. Once I find it, I'll put it into the email. But I think it would be a fun little exercise to work on courage stories together and try to get something together and go to a moth together, Zoom style. And we can all bring courage stories that we worked on. And if it doesn't work for this one, maybe we'll do next month or something like that.
I don't know. I'm kind of afraid to do that.
Courage in numbers, hopefully. Mac, can we do a little introduction game and introduce the people who are with us today?
Yeah. Let's get that done. And you each have a prompt, which goes basically something like this: to let us, please say your name and then respond to the prompt in a few sentences. Give us a little bit of detail. If I were a piece of art, I would be, and I can just wait for you to sort of jump up, or I can kind of ask each one of you. You want to start jumping?
I will start, but I think after me, you just call people out.
All right.
I am. I want to be an art piece that's a MacGuffin. I want to be the thing that everybody searches for and then solves the problems. That was my choice. I am like the embodiment of the One Ring or the Sword of Destiny, and then people come and they find me, and then they just realize, oh yeah, this is what I needed all my life. Was a little more Dan Boyd.
Olatunji, how about you?
Yeah, so my name is Olatunji Bledsoe. I go by TJ, so it's a lot less difficult to slaughter. And I thought about this and I couldn't think of one particular art piece, so I just went with abstract art simply because it's interpretation. And it definitely, the more you look at it, the more your opinion can change, and each individual can get their own, opinion of it. So, yeah.
Thank you. That's great.
That's,
Great, TJ.
Wait. I don't know if that's a cop out but yeah.
No, you got me thinking. Kamaria?
Yeah, I'm along the same lines, but mine is more specific. Like as soon as I saw this piece, I was like, that just speaks to my heart. I don't need a caption on that. It's called The Impermanence of Time by Salvador Dali. So it's the painting that you see with the melting clocks. And I was like, yes, I can't go anywhere on time. My timing is off. Like everything's upside down. That painting right there, that's me. And now I feel like I've gotten it together. Like literally my watches would stop on my wrist. They would stop working. I didn't have to submerge them in water or hit them against anything. They just give up on me. But now everything's under control. That's my piece.
Thanks, Kamaria. Noah, about you.
My name's Noah Firestone. I almost slipped. If I were a piece of art, I think I would be a extravagantly conceived and poorly executed multimedia interactive art piece.
You want to say any more about that?
No. Poorly executed.
Lots of LEDs.
Hey,
Lots of LEDs.
Susan, what about you?
So the only thing I thought of, and it's like only if you lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan, would you know this art piece. So they had this huge, like Calder Picasso sculpture, huge, semi-circle, sort of open black onyx like thing that they stuck in the center of like a sidewalk. And as you drove by it, though it didn't really move, it changed shapes and changed itself, and it was just like so cool, and I loved it so much. And then their wisdom, they put that thing in the mall where you couldn't see it change. And so I want to get it out of the mall and back on the street, and I'll be it.
What is wrong with all these people? Right, I gotcha. Okay, and our guest tonight, Miriam.
Hi. So you know those line drawings that turn into a cartoon? That's what I want to be. I want to be a real squiggly line drawing that can move around and reshape and go all over the place.
Wow, cool. Okay, well, for me, the first thing that came in my mind with this prompt was, you know, those like sculptures that's actually it's a car that's been crushed and they're like a, you know, they're just like you can see like the chrome, you know. And I think of this as something that's just come from the crusher and it's kind of dirty the way junkyards are. But there's some little shine in different places, like maybe where the hood ornament was or whatever. But basically, it looks like sort of a big piece of squashed square cube junk with some interesting details. So that's it.
That's great.
Nice.
Well, that is awesome. And we have successfully made it through the first leg of the show. And we're going to open it up to stories. Noah, are you ready to give us a spooky cam version of your story?
Not particularly. I didn't do my homework, but I could tell a story if no one else has one. I know I kind of signed myself up. Oh, am I on
Yes.
mute? Okay.
You are going today.
All right. I gotta stand somewhere else. Okay. So the story I was working on didn't super work out for me, and then I decided to play video games all day. So I'm just gonna do like a related, funnier story, and hopefully I can like work on some of what I was gonna do. So this is a story about my college days, and I am a poor student, and I spent a lot of time in college. I don't remember anything about high school, and what I remember about college is usually not related to how interesting the course material was. Usually what I remember about my college days is if I was in class with a friend, or if the professor was particularly charismatic or weird or etc. So the story I'm going to tell you about happened in art and culture in Weimar, Germany. I think it was like a 200 level class. And I was in the class with my friend David Cook, who will tell you that I am a coward. And the subject matter was very interesting. And we watched a lot of movies in class. So we watched Metropolis, and we watched The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and we learned about Expressionists and the Bauhaus and stuff like that. And so that was super interesting. And our professor was Dr. Spencer. And he was not a weird sort, he was a charismatic sort. He was British, I think. Accents are hard sometimes. He was tall, he was lanky. He was probably in his 40s at the time. And he had sort of that boyish air about him that like the leading man in a rom-com would have, you know, that sort of cheeky British overgrown boy thing. And you know, it was just the best class. We were learning about cool things. This guy sounded sophisticated and looked like what you knew a disheveled professor would look like. And because we watched movies, the lecture was the class was in a giant lecture hall. And in my memory, it's this giant 200-seat lecture hall. It's like stadium seatings. The seats are like descending at a steep angle because it's one of the lecture halls that have a projector in them. And you know, back in the day, not every classroom had one, so that's where we were. And we're probably like 30 people, 200-person capacity, and we're all spread out And I got to class before David, and the lecture started, and I sat in the middle of the room because I wasn't brave enough to sit in the front, and I was not brave enough to sit in the back and prove that I was a coward, so I was always exactly in the middle. And I'd say about 20 minutes into the lecture, there's a noise at the back of the hall, and my friend David Cook comes in, and he sort of, he comes down, and he goes all the way to the middle, and then he has to cut in because I'm in the middle of the aisle as well, and he has to squeeze by like 5 people. And I'm getting more and more embarrassed as this is happening. And he plops down next to me, and he looks over and he says, "Hey, how's it going?" And then he starts digging in his book bag as if to like get out his materials, his note, his something to take notes on. But what instead he gets out is the student paper, which, not to malign the lantern, but it's not covering the most important stories of the day. But nevertheless, he takes it out. It's not a broadsheet, and he shakes it out. Just, and he sticks it in front of his face, and he thinks that's what he's gonna do for the rest of the lecture. And if I were the professor, because I'm a coward, I would ignore it. I'm a school teacher, so if I have a super disruptive kid and I think I can get away with ignoring it, that's what I do. But Dr. Spencer stops the lecture, says, "Excuse me," and just waits. And I am mortified. And David, not so much, but he does put his paper away. And that is a moment that has stayed with me to this day. And I don't know, I found out later that his mom, who is also a professor at the school, made him write an apology to Dr. Spencer. So that is the snippet of my story today. Sorry.
That is an interesting start. Noah and I worked on this a little bit together, so I know one of the angles we were thinking about going with it. Going back to you, Noah, right off the bat, do you, in terms of feedback, do you want this to be a story? Because this is very different than what we had sort of discussed.
Yeah, so as I don't
Do you
think that's
want
going to
this
go
to
in the
work
other story.
On its own.
But the sort of the description of the class maybe will make it into the story. I don't think I'm going to put the David Cook's caper or fiasco in there. So I'm interested, like, could you sort of picture the space I was in, and what questions should I raise? What should I touch on more? I could go into what we learned or why I enjoyed it, or I could describe Dr. Spencer more, sort of those kind of things. I just added the anecdote, so it'd be a little interesting.
Well, Noah, you had me totally hooked in this story. First of all, I think, you really set the stage, which was cool. I mean, the way the lecture hall was laid out. But I'll tell you, the guy I'm mostly interested in is David. Is like, what? WTF? Like, what was he about? And was this like one time, or was this just what you could expect if you hung out with him.
Yeah, there are more David stories, and it is something I'm sort of bouncing around in my head. He's a charismatic dude, and he does ridiculous things sometimes. So, I could definitely take it in that direction.
I'm wondering if there's a chance that David is sort of your alter ego in some way.
Yeah, I think he's just my diametric opposite is what David is. I do have an alter ego, but David is not it.
Who is your alter ego?
My friend Zach. We have sort of a fight club thing going on because we usually live next door to each other and we often work at the same place. So.
Huh.
Okay, the
Yeah.
first
Gosh,
rule
I
of Fight
love you.
Club is that you don't talk about Fight Club. I
Yeah.
want to know more about what's happening there.
Yeah.
We also often get mistaken for each other. So it's
Wait, what?
possible.
How?
Yeah, I don't know. Like constantly
Just,
people are asking us.
It's hard to tell because he's got his thing off right now, but Zach is 6'2", 6'3".
He's pretty tall. I don't know. He's not that tall.
All right.
Call me short?
Zach's over. Yeah, Zach is very tall and lanky and has blonde hair. That is straight. So it is surprising to me that they think he looks like.
We have been accused of being twins when we're standing next to each other multiple times.
I think those people were drunk. Damn it, has alter ego. Yeah, I think that a direction to go is multiple David Cook stories and try to wrap them together and say something about that. If we're trying to make this anecdote into something, into its own little thing, it's interesting, but what is the change in you? What is the change in David Cook? I think we're missing that.
Yeah, I agree.
Well,
And I don't know
one of the things that I'm thinking about is you talk about this kind of uncomfortableness, anxiety, but you don't tell us much about what's going on inside you. Like how bad is it? It even starts when he's starting to come, getting people to move and come towards you and root in his bag and
Right.
describe what's going on, but what's going on inside you, and that could be a place to go with. Have you been able, are there situations, would you handle that? Will that situation feel the same to you today? Or, there's places you could go with that internal weather of yours and how you've kind of worked around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I didn't think about that, enough. That's why I didn't just sort of, because it's so uninteresting to me, my own internal weather. It's always about the same.
Yeah, I feel I think it can feel like that to us when we're the ones telling the story, but Mac's entirely right. A big piece of this puzzle that what people are interested in this style of storytelling is to understand and hear the inner thoughts of people who aren't themselves, right? Sort of like you're saying, like, oh, my thoughts aren't that interesting. Everybody's sitting there thinking that and being like, I want to hear someone else's thoughts. I'm stuck with my own all the time. And so if you can reveal that and learn to articulate it, that's really compelling to people. And there might be something in here that to do some sort of push-pull of you're really have an affinity for David Cook and you have an affinity for this teacher, and whose side are you on? Because they're sort of pulling you in different directions. And to go with a sort of courage angle, you make no choice in this. You don't tell him to stop. But you are also, the way I'm envisioning it, is doing the whole "I don't know you" to David Cook, right? Who is this guy? I don't know. And you're just getting like real small. I'm not here. I'm not in this 200 people room. I sat here to be invisible, and I'm gonna pretend I'm still invisible, even though you're so magnetic that this friend of yours will step over 100 other kids to get to you.
To read the paper next to me.
So I don't know where you take that, but that there's some interesting sort of tension dynamics there. You opened it up with a line that was something like, "This is a story about being a poor student." It really wasn't about that. You did talk about not remembering much of high school, and you did sort of repeat that refrain that you weren't good at being a student. But there's no that in this story. Thinking about it, that's an opener that people will go to. That sort of thing. They'll do a pre-roll summary of what they're going to tell people. And I think that it's a tricky thing to do and get right, because people will do things and they'll say, "This is a story about my mother's unexpected death." And people, like, that's kind of, it feels like it's a good line. You're going to hook them and get them to listen, but you also gave it away. We want you to be in the moment, and we want to be surprised when you're surprised. So the flip side of why people are drawn to, one of the reasons people are drawn to this sort of opener for stories, is that you want to set expectations and then pay off on those expectations. So that's why it seems like a good idea, but you want to set the expectations subtly. And I think there might have been a way to go with this, like what I thought you were doing originally, because I know that the second half of this story is that you were going to come back to this idea of poor student, and you were going to talk about being a student of life, and that's how it was going to tie in, and you would have created sort of a twist situation. Oh, I told you that I was a poor student, but it's not really about a math student or an English student or a art film history student being poor at, but a different kind of student. And I think that would have had a potential to work. But as it is, that's not what this story is about. The story is about David Cook being ridiculous in this class and disrespecting a teacher that you think is really cool. In that sense, we got to get to that inciting incident way faster. Set that scene of that classroom, and then David Cook enters. And
I can do.
Yeah. What other comments do people have?
like the vulnerability of the story. I like how willing it's Noah, right? Noah is to be vulnerable and talk about how he feels. And I'd like to hear more of that if he could give it like more description about himself, but also about the setting and how it impacts him too. The school and what it was like and when it was it recently or far away? A few more details to really help us draw that picture in our minds of, is it a New England school or is it a New York City school? And just some of those details that can help us kind of get a fast understanding of who he is.
Yeah.
I wanted more detail there because I thought he said the school was in Germany. And I thought,
Oh,
if
yeah.
this is out of the country, how much did it take to get yourself to go out of the country to go to school? Like that backdrop, I would love to know.
The story happened in Columbus, Ohio. The class was about Germany, and the professor was international. But yeah, that's all good notes.
You could put in there,
So-
good thing the professor came to me because I'd never go to Germany to take a class.
I liked the line about the lantern. I liked that you gave a specific there. School papers always have sort of ridiculous names. OSU is apparently no exception. I liked the description of him. I think that, I know you, so you're a writer, and that's funny. And I think a lot of this description, once you write it down, you'll be able to have it sing. I like the description of the professor, but it is one where you gave a lot, and I think once you get it written down, you'll get it down to that one good sentence that allows us to extrapolate all of it. That he was this, cool professor that had just the slightly disheveled look and yada, yada, yada. He was very clear to me. A question to everybody else: how clear was David Cook? I felt like he got less description. I saw some head shaking, but is there a?
No, I completely had to make him up. I mean, I almost think if we did a poll, we might have each had David Cook look quite different. He had like a beard and horn rimmed glasses, and he had his hair sort of brushed back, and anyway. So, but I'm sure, yeah, I think that would have been helpful because he's so important to the story.
No, so I think the suggestion for this next round, where you try to do the story, is to, just try to do that, to cut the professor down to like one or two sentences, give us one or two sentences about David Cook, and let's sort of break that down into the three parts of like. So we've got the setting and we've got the characters. It's this teacher. You're in this giant classroom. You've got David Cook and you. There's you. And then we can just like sort of storyboard it out. So each of these people have motivations. The teacher wants to teach a good class, be kind of cool. David Cook also wants to be cool, and to do so, it's in opposition to this teacher. You want to be invisible. Is that how do you feel about that sort of blocking out of motivations and just the setting?
Yeah, I like all of that.
Okay. In this case, would you being invisible helps the teacher be cool. So you're sort of on the side of this teacher. Meanwhile, David Cook needs you to be visible because he needs to show off that he has friends in this class.
Right.
So that creates the conflict. And I don't know fully how to express that. I'm also open to other ideas. Does anybody have any other take on it? Like, we could just talk about the conflict being David Cook wants to sit next to Noah and how he's going to get there. And it's just this man versus man sort of thing. I've got to go through all these people. And you could tell it from that perspective. You know, you can give that sort of setting of what's going on and tell these other people's motivations, but then make David Cook the protagonist and be like, he's trying to get to me. He's trying, and I can't ward him off with my eyes. And then it's his epic battle to get there, and then he sits down and he pulls out his paper. Success. Now that I am next to my good friend Noah, I can ignore everything else in the universe.
And Noah, I think one other thing you could think about, and I've been thinking about those internal feelings, is if you know, what were you saying, or what would you be saying in your mind as he's coming across and coming closer, and you know the things that you're quiet, but that's because you don't express things, but they're still going on, and you could use that, turn that into some kind of dialogue for yourself, in terms of kind of what you're saying and what you think he's saying in his mind as he's approaching you, because this is a really rich situation, but you're so used to hiding. And what you're going to do is you're going to let us in on what's really going on.
Yeah. And then the resolution can be he gets called out, and 3 days later, no longer cool, his mom makes him apologize.
Noah, how does mom even find out?
Oh, I'm sure he told her the story with pride.
Yeah, are you up for giving this framework a try?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Start when you're ready, and take a minute if you need it.
I just want to add, I love the when keeping it real goes wrong twist that just happened there, because the mom making you write the letter, well, making David write the letter. It's like, yeah, a fall from grace. When you're overconfident, when you're too brave, this is what happens. Your mom shows up.
All right. So I am not cool, but I am a very good sidekick. David Cook, he is cool. Part of being a sidekick is being invisible until you're needed. And I'm very good at being invisible. I know where all the best hiding spots are. And in a 200-seat lecture hall that's only filled with 20 people, the place you hide is in plain sight. So I sat in the middle row of the middle aisle of the lecture hall. and unobtrusively waited for my teacher, Dr. Spencer, to drop some knowledge into my brain. Dr. Spencer was teaching us about art and culture in Weimar, Germany, the interwar period. And he had sort of the boyish charm that only a middle-aged British man can have. He was tall and lanky, and he was a maestro at the front of the class. On this particular day, the hero of our story, David Cook, had not yet arrived, and the lecture was well on its way. We were learning about the Expressionists, and I was enthralled. But about 20 minutes in, there was a commotion at the back of the lecture hall. The doors opened, and our main character entered with his big belly.
Yes.
And his
Yeah, go there.
big, sophisticated leather satchel, and his thermos coffee mug clipped to that sophisticated leather satchel. And as is the nature of heroes and protagonists, he had to make an entrance, which of course was antithesis to me. So I would have quietly sat myself at the back of the lecture hall, but not David Cook. And I immediately, with horror, realized that he was going to try to make his way to me. And he comes down the aisle, sort of huffing and puffing, because maybe he hurried a little bit to get there 20 minutes late. And he lines up with my aisle, and there's 4 people between him and I. And I'm dreading this, because all eyes are on him. And I know that all those eyes, all 20 of those eyes, are going to follow him past each of the 4 people as he squeezes by, inconveniencing all of them while he's inconveniencing us, until finally he plops himself down next to me while I'm silently screaming, "Why? Why? Why?" Not satisfied with having made his entrance so far, he turns to me and quite audibly says, "Hey, how's it going?" Mortified, I stare ahead and mumble something. But his performance is not over. He unclips his coffee with a loud snapping noise. And then he starts digging in his satchel. And I'm just praying that what he's going to pull out is a notepad and a pencil to respectfully take some notes. But no, he's too cool to take notes in a class he's paying $60 an hour to take. He pulls out that most sophisticated of monthly journals, the Lantern, the student paper. And even though it's not a broadsheet, he shakes it out as if it were, places it in front of his face, and begins to read as if he had just sat down in a cafe next to his good friend, Noah Firestone. Dr. Spencer is not pleased. He stops the lecture. He calls out my buddy, who sheepishly puts away his paper, and that's the end of it. Or so I thought. But even cool kids sometimes get their comeuppance. And David Cook's mother, having learned of his paper, makes him write an apology to Dr. Spencer.
Yeah, that felt like clear and succinct to me. What do other people think? Did that seem like an improvement?
Yeah,
Oh.
there's a bunch of things, Noah. Like, I like that he plops down. I mean, you can hear it. The eyes, the way you talk about the eyes following you. You talk about hiding. You're a good hider. I would have liked a couple examples of hiding spots on campus, just so we got a sense of that. But anyway, yeah.
I loved that detail. I
Yeah,
loved the sidekick detail. It was great.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Susan.
Oh, I like the big belly part, because then when he has to go by those 4 people, that makes it even more hilarious that he's like, I can just see this small little aisle, that they have in school, and then this, man with like briefcases and a big belly just like pushing through them. It was just hilarious.
One thing that I noticed in that was more clear to me, and I think would heighten it, is you've got the sidekick part. I think push into that. I'm this guy's sidekick. We're in this together, and stuff like that. But also, you narrate this teacher is cool, but he's sort of abstractly cool. I think we want to get there. All the you parts are really good, and I think just keep going into that. And so, like, I think he's cool. I like the way he dresses. I like the way he teaches class, because that's the tension for you, is that you like this teacher and you like Cook.
Yeah.
And they're at odds, and that loyalty pull, I think that's the place to heighten tension in it. And I think we get your care for Cook, but we don't get it as much for the teacher. The teacher just seems abstractly cool.
Right.
And you might feel differently. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say I meant to like talk about that conflict when David says like hi to me. I felt like that would be a place where I could be like, I'm torn because I want to respect the teacher and I want to hear what he's saying, but I also like have this social, I have to say hi to my friend. And how do I resolve that?
Yeah, I want it to be a rule of 3. I want you to hit it 3 times. So the way that I see it is, as soon as he enters that room, there he is, and you know what he's going to do. He's already upset everybody because he's entering loudly, right?
Right.
And so you could be like, how loud is this going to get? And I think that you can do it again when he sits down where you're talking about and he says hi to you. And then you can do it more clearly there, and then I think you can hit it at the end with this mom letter and like my two heroes, or whatever, however you do it. Come to an uneasy truce via whatever. That's my thought. I do think I want to know your internal conflict at the situation as early as possible. I want to know what the stakes are for you, and to believe that you care about them. And I do think that you that came across in this, that like your anxiety about being seen was legit. Susan, technical matter. Can you tilt your camera so that it can get your head in? Just to min-max it like a jerk, just up a little bit. No. Perfect. Cool. Both those tellings were in the 5-ish to 7-minute range. That one was just a little bit shorter. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thanks for all the good feedback. That was really helpful.
And then our second teller today is Miriam Carey, and she is good friends with Mac McDavid, and she's being very gracious and brave and courageous, hanging out with us to tell a story.
Are we ready for me? I'm standing in Union Station waiting for my Aunt Nancy to get off the train from Cleveland, and I have one of those cinematic moments that happen. I'm looking through the crowd. I'm trying to find her because she's 80 years old, and I'm worried I won't see her and things will get messed up. And all of a sudden, the whole scene turns to black and white, and there's steam coming out. And my Aunt Nancy whooshes through the crowd wearing a fedora and a scarf and a long trench coat, and she's carrying one of those old-timey suitcases. And I feel for a moment like I've been transported into like a 1940s movie. But I hug my Aunt Nancy, and the scene fades, and I'm so glad to see her because I know that we're going to sit for the next 2 hours in Union Station while she's waiting for her next train, and she is going to give me every bit of gossip that there is in Cleveland. My Aunt Nancy isn't really my aunt. She's my dad's first cousin, but we call her Aunt. And she and her 4 sisters kind of ran the show in Cleveland for a long time, keeping track of a huge diaspora of cousins. There must have been 200 of us, Careys and Fians and Barrys, and keeping us all together and being really acting as the glue for our family and our community, so to speak. And her 2 little sisters, she had 2 little sisters who were twins, Jean and Jan, and they walked around town with these real fancy Chanel suits on and little pillbox hats, and they knew everybody. They'd show up at your house with a little thing of Irish soda bread, and that meant that they wanted to sit down for a few minutes and get all the gossip from you so they could take it to the next house. We were under strict orders never to tell any family secrets to Jean and Jan. And Nancy's older sister was named Maura, but we couldn't call her Maura because her real name was Sister Sheila, and she wore a habit from head to toe, one of those nun's habits that was very intimidating. And her sister, Phoebe, lived up north in Chicago, and Nancy herself was quite a character because she had the distinction of starting every softball game at the family picnic, but she also had gone and gotten certification at clown school. So it was a very multi-talented family. And over the course of the next hour, Nancy weaved for me all of the gossip, everything that was going on back home. And I realized how much I missed Cleveland. I really missed my home, sitting there talking to her. And after about an hour, I realized that she was running out of gossip. So I asked her, Nancy, what was it like growing up in the 20s on the west side of Cleveland on 114th Street? She kind of waxed poetic for a minute. She looked at me, and she had a real gruff way of speaking, real fast way of speaking. But she said, it was tough. She said, she told me that her father, and I never knew this, but her father had been a tradesman, and he built these 4 houses that he was going to live in one and sell the other 3 for profit. And he was just putting the for sale signs up when the stock market crashed in 1929. And after that, the family had to move back to 114th Street. And at night, her father would fix beer crates for a penny a piece to make money for the family. And she looked at me and she said, Miriam, it was really bad. And one day, my father found out that there was this job he could get if there was a snowstorm, sitting on the back of a truck full of ash and throwing the ash out on the street for the cars. And it was a really good job. It paid cash, but we couldn't do it because we couldn't afford a telephone in the house. And she said to me, your grandfather offered to take that call. And that meant that on a night of a snowstorm at 4 a.m, the phone would ring at your grandfather's house and wake up the babies and all the kids. And that also meant that he would pull on his coat, pull on his boots and his hat, and walk all the way over from 114th Street to our house just to knock on the door and let my dad know that he could have a job on that crew for the day. And if it weren't for that kind of favor done by your grandfather and that kind of action that he took, we wouldn't have made it, maybe, and that's why she told me, that's why she and all her sisters worked so hard to keep us all together. That fear of living without that sense of community and the need to keep the community connected throughout. And these days I keep moving farther and farther away from Cleveland and my family. And I struggle, especially during COVID, to find connection and to keep and maintain that for myself. And I think of my Aunt Nancy whooshing through Union Station at 80 years old to go and see her sister. And it keeps me trying.
That's great.
How long was that? Was it too long?
There is no too long. That was perfect. That was in the 5 to 7 minute range. I want to ask you some questions about it, but first I'm going to say I really appreciate how you used camera work when you were telling. And I don't know if this was just a natural thing, but you leaned in and you moved back and you used the space. A lot of times you'll see people switch to standing. I feel that doesn't work, but because it's just this new medium of like telling these stories in a Zoom sort of thing, where you find the ways that you can add artistry without it feeling artificial. And I think you did a really good job of that.
Thanks.
Pulling us in with your language and your blocking. And when you became the different people, when you were the grandpa and you were throwing, the ash onto the street, it really brought me into it that you embodied those people and were in that moment acting it out, even though it was Inception style story, really, because so just to keep hitting on this, one of the reasons for people listening that's important as a skill when working on these stories to tell at other Zoom meetings and things like that is a lot of times you want to tell these stories within stories. She meets her aunt, and then her aunt tells her this story. So she meets the aunt, she becomes the aunt, and then the aunt is telling about the grandfather, and she becomes the grandfather as still the narrator of the aunt. This is all that's a complicated sequence of events, but it was completely clear because of the way she told it and the way that she embodied those characters. I think if I hadn't laid it out how complicated that was, we wouldn't even think twice about it. So very much kudos to you. I see people sort of screw that sort of thing up, and it was very good. There's a lot of characters, and I think I did a good job of keeping them straight because of the way you told it. The questions that I have are, and you feel free to push this back to me if you want to hear my thoughts first, but what's the most important thing about this story for you? Like, is that something that's clear for you now?
Good question. No, I've been working on Mac invited me Friday, so I've been working on this story since Friday, and I've been trying to figure out like what's the hook really. For me in that moment, it was that Aunt Nancy had never gotten that personal with me, and I loved the story she told me about growing up on 114th Street, and that the way that you think of how poor people are when they come to this country, and what they went through at that time. And also trying to compare it to now. So I had a lot of ideas going on, and I would love some direction if anyone has a thought on that.
Yeah, I think that that's something that we can, in the very least, talk about, and see if we can find something that you like. You brought it up, and I did put it in my notes. I think it's a risky thing, and I think that the comparing it to now is so much on people's heads that you don't need to say it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that saying, especially now with COVID, is so nail on the head, and we're all living it, and we all think about it all the time, that from my perspective, it's going to be a couple years before I want to hear anybody tell a COVID story. I'm getting there for the escape is what I'm looking for in stories right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, these, and so, I think that there's a lot of things about that. I also feel like there's that question of, as hard as it is right now, it's always a tricky thing to compare two pains. Like, the depression is like real for people. The stock market, you know what I mean? Like, and I would be careful for that reason too. 'Cause I forget, there's one where I was at just the other day, and somebody's like, it's just like, oh yeah, not to throw any friend under the bus, but I had a friend tell a story about famine in Romania and having to wait in bread lines, and we were talking about it, and another friend was like, you can relate it to COVID. And so we sort of had this discussion, and I didn't say it out loud then, but one of my thoughts was just like, it's not the same. Like, we waited in line, but it's not famine. It's not, you can only get 3 slices of bread a day. So I think that just be careful of like comparing, I don't know what the word is to use, generational trauma to each other. Other thoughts from people?
Miriam, I love the way you made your Aunt Nancy real. You described her, and I love that first scene of the steam and going to black and white. And then the stories are really powerful about the grandfather getting up and going, everybody waking up in the house, where the phone is downstairs and whatever. I think all of those things are really strong, really powerful. I think I might have missed at the beginning exactly when you met her at the station. And
A few years ago.
Yeah, but I think it might be sort of helpful because you're working with some different time frames here. So it's before COVID, and you met her at the station, and here she is, 80 years old. That's a big deal that she's going to go see her friend. I think some people might need some more help. I don't really need it, but the idea if you get this phone, and it's one phone in the house, and it's like in the kitchen, I mean, it's not like somebody's rolling over in bed, like in the detective movies, and they got to come and see the body or something. I think you could do a little more about that. And then just the devastation of the fact that, he had to leave those houses, which might have meant he lost the houses. It might have meant he, whatever that was, that,
Okay, yeah.
just that kind of stuff. And the distance between the two houses, how far he had to go. You threw out some streets and stuff, but actually, how far was that journey? Was it? I kept thinking, oh, maybe they're next door, or maybe they're, was it 2 blocks or 3 blocks, and it always had to be in a snowstorm, right?
Mhm.
It always had to be. I mean, it was like you just running over there in the middle of the night. It was freaking snowing outside, So anyway, and I'm a little bit out of. I don't know about the COVID thing. I think in some ways, by really emphasizing the closeness and the connection and people sort of on top of each other. Like, how did she throw out that? Did she throw out the first pitch? What about the clown school? What did she do with that? But even by just continuing we see how closely everybody was connected. It brings us to today. It makes us realize what we've lost. So I'm not sure you have to say it, but I was okay with you saying it.
Miriam, I love that imagery of the Irish soda bread. And it's this welcoming gift when you go to a hostess's house, you bring them something and you let them know that you want to be close with them. And that was the signal. And especially, I mean, you did say that, okay, because of COVID, I really hold on to stories like this of people being very close. But that idea of being physically there with people and breaking bread literally and sharing the same air, even like how important that is. So you contrasted this idea of folks kind of being in a hardship, having a really difficult time when there was one phone among the extended family and you had to leave the house to tell the news, but also what a privilege that was to be able to be there with your family and share the news and have news to share and have family. So I thought that was beautiful how you contrasted those ideas, and I think those came through really clearly.
Thank you.
I really like the part where we found out, when you brought up the Great Depression, and like, I felt like I time traveled. Like I was just floating around in time somewhere, and then I knew exactly when and where I was, and I felt everything that came after that I could kind of envision a lot better. So I that was like super cool for me, just listening to it. And the other thing that I was thinking about in regards to the COVID part of it, for me, the story is like kind of, there's a lot of suffering in it, but it's like a heartwarming story, right? Of family looking out for each other. And then it seems like quite a contrast talking about, how we struggle with that. Like now more so. So I don't know, maybe if that was moved to the front and then you could end on that happy note, or think about how, or if you don't want to do that, think about how, how that sort of change in mood kind of works. I'm not saying you have to move it. That was just something that came to my mind because it did seem like a shift for me, but maybe other people didn't perceive it that way. Those were like the two things that super stuck out to me.
Oh, that's good feedback. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, the scenes are so good. Each setting that you take us to gets very clearly painted in our minds. It's very like you're creating a visual movie for us. But I did write down what's your age right at the beginning. Like I could see, yeah, you. I could see everything, but I didn't know how old.
Because I look like I'm 27. Is that why?
No, because I was wondering if you were, were you 18 when you were meeting the girl, or like I didn't know that it was a few years ago.
Okay.
Like Matt, and so everything was set except for the time period of when you're having this conversation with her.
Okay.
There's with this story, it's really interesting because it's very pretty, but I think I would struggle to do the same sort of graphing that I did with Noah's story. Your setting and your characters are there. Your motivation or your conflict is not clear to me. And the resolution is this sense of thankfulness. And I like what you said, this idea of like being close to family and having this connection and longing for it, and how you know, this idea of family gossip sort of bonds us, is what I see as the through line. I'm going through a book now that I almost did today's lesson on, but probably in a week or two I'll talk about it more. But it's this idea that basically the thesis is Aristotle came up with this 3-act structure that is sort of the Western bar, and we turn all our stories into this. Setting, conflict, resolution. There's a couple different ways to say it, but basically that. And it makes the argument that longer stories and novels and stuff like that didn't even exist when he came up with this. He was talking about a very specific genre, and we should make room for different kinds of things. And it says, it basically is giving different examples for this. And personally, I feel like because of the way you crafted it, this is I'm very open to it being like this. But as confusingly as I said that, I don't have what the repeating pattern is. I just know because you set the scene so well, I could follow you through all the transitions, and emotionally, I'm there with you at the end. But in that traditional structure, things that I would say are like the conflict, I guess, seems to be this depression story. That seems to be the real story. Do you need to just tell that story? I don't know if that question makes any sense. Like, if I asked you to set it out, like, what do you think the conflict is, and what do you think of yourself as the protagonist of this story? Because I think I would. But who's the protagonist, and what is the protagonist's motivation?
So
And
I saw the theme of the story as like family was like two-sided, and that she brought that in with the soda bread and the gossiping people who you had to keep secrets from. But at the same time, the story was about, how much you needed family, but also you also had to protect yourself from family. Like that's how I saw the conflict. So I don't know if anybody else thought of it like that.
So Dan, I think it's a really good question about the protagonist, and it got me thinking that, Miriam, I think the protagonist might be the family itself. And I thought, who's the glue now? Has the glue held? Because at 80 years old, she's probably not the glue anymore. What's happened? And I had this sort of vision of what was it like for you to put her back on the train? Or anyway, it's sort of like it's really about a family that survived. But has it continued to survive as she's gotten older, or you got the picture? I think.
Yeah. Huh. Those are some good insights. You guys are smart.
I loved the sort of tension with don't tell the twins anything, don't tell any family secrets when they come around. But then you revealed that maybe because of having that one phone and needing to disseminate information in this way that feels unorthodox to us as, currently, that's where maybe the gossiping came from. It was like you had to be the telephone. We didn't all have a telephone. So I thought that was great. It was like, okay, don't tell them anything. But ultimately, it was like, hey, we kind of had to talk to one another. This was a strong suit. This was a strength of ours. And again, when I thought about COVID, that inability to be close to each other and word of mouth share those stories, like, I mean, just how we rely on the telephone and Zoom and all this technology now to disseminate our stories. I thought that was a cool detail that, like, uh-oh, Jan and Jean are coming around, like, don't tell them anything. But now, like, oh my gosh, if only I could talk to my great aunts right now and tell them a story face to face.
That's good insight too. You're good at this.
Miriam, you've gotten really tinny. Your audio is getting tinnier, I think. It
You
is for
think?
me anyway. Yeah.
Does it sound really bad to anyone else? Does
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, maybe just unplug and replug.
Okay. How's this now?
Yeah,
That
that's
fixed
better.
it. So yeah, this is so worked out. So what we might do is think of some other way to play with it and just do some of that. But I would like to hear if you have any thoughts, and you can say you're not there yet, but with this idea of in stories, one of the things we look for is to have a protagonist that has a strong desire, and we want to see them get it or learn something from not getting it. And so other people in the chat sort of came up with ideas of what they saw as the protagonist and different ways you could go about emphasizing it and getting to that. But I would like to hear, if you have it, an answer of, like, if you think about that too for yourself, like, what pops up and feels right to you with this version right now?
I love the insight about family, because it is a source of conflict. It was it's probably where my psyche is, that you want all the gossip, but you can't be part of the gossip. And there was strict rules from my mother about what we were allowed to say and what we weren't. And it was really almost overbearing. She wanted to present this wonderful image of our family and never let anyone know about the underbelly. So it could be that, Nancy is sort of a threat to me almost. And then she tells me this beautiful story that folds me back into the whole reason why I love my family so much. And sort of brings it back around for me that way.
All right. That is a great answer. And that super helps me out. I would like you to take a minute and go back to that place and see if you can be your mom and show us that scene where she tells you can't tell them anything. And is this a repeated refrain? Did she do this on multiple occasions? Were other people around, or did she pull you by yourself? Because when my mom would have these sorts of imperatives, she'd always corner me alone. And I always had the feeling like if my brother Christopher got a story, it was a slightly different angle that she would tell him than she would tell me. So I think those sorts of questions, and if you're up for it, I would like you just like think about it, try to envision that and give us the scene and show us that scene.
Do you mean tell the story again, but from my mother's point of view, or just with that
No.
idea?
I just want to see this snippet of your mom telling you, don't tell Aunt Nancy anything. Also, you can't tell Aunt Jean, and you can't tell Aunt Jan anything. And right? Because they're like it. The way I remember it is they were the super bad ones, and then Nancy, you could give her a little leeway. I don't know if that is true, but that's I just want that scene. Just it doesn't have to be in a story structure or anything like that. I just want to hear the scene.
All right, you asked for it. Let's see. My mother hears a car pull up and she looks out the window and she says, "Oh, Jesus Christ, it's Jan and Jean coming up with another soda bread. You don't tell them anything about what happened here with the mouse last night. There are no mice in this house. Do you hear me? If they find out that we have mice, it's going to be all over and everyone's going to know about it. So you keep your mouth shut."
That's perfect. That's great. So, yeah, I think that's really good. I think something of that nature, I could see that fitting in to this and filling out that idea of family as unit moving forward. Like we're all different parts and we touch, and like I don't know how I don't have the answers to how to get there, but I think that scene does what we talked about with the Noah situation, where it brings you into it, where you have this tension between your mom and the relationship you want to have with your Aunt Nancy and the loyalty push and pull. And then it resolves as she opens up and tells you this vulnerable story that you probably wouldn't be allowed to tell her if, you had lived it.
That's great.
I don't know how
This is so helpful. No, I've kind of rewritten the story in my head already, so it's very good feedback. I really am impressed.
We have a little time. If you think you could give it one last go, I would love to hear how it's transformed.
All right, give me 1 second.
Yeah, take a minute.
So I'm standing a couple years ago in Union Station waiting for my Aunt Nancy to get off the train. And I'm reminded, don't tell her anything that can get back to Cleveland. The last time I had a date with this really older guy, I ran into someone from Cleveland, and within 5 minutes, my mother was on the phone saying, "What are you dating older fellas for now?" She can't stand it when she hears gossip about her kids. And Nancy and her sisters are some of the biggest gossips in Cleveland, but we love them for it. They come over with their beautiful soda bread and they sit at the table, my two little twin aunts, Jean and Jan, with their little hats on, giving us all the latest gossip, and Nancy herself at our picnics while she's firing up the next softball game or dressed up as a clown, because she does that too. She's willing to pull one of us aside and say, "Well, you know who's running for judge, don't you? Your cousin Joe." These ladies with their soda bread gifts and their family picnic keep us intertwined together. And the only thing that we have to give them and pay for it is just a little bit of gossip. Nancy swooshes off the train. All of a sudden, Union Station is transformed into like a 1940s movie, because there she is with her fedora hat and her London fog coat and her little suitcase, and she is ready to dish. And we sit down in Union Station, and she tells me who's running for judge, and she tells me who's not running for judge because of a big scandal. And I hear everything that's going on in Cleveland. But after about an hour, she's starting to run out of steam. She asked me what I'm doing, and I'm trying to deflect. I don't want to tell her what I'm up to in Chicago because I know my mother will hear it back in Cleveland. And so instead I asked her, Nancy, what was it like to grow up on the west side of Cleveland when you were young, back in the 20s? And she kind of sat back for a minute and took a breath from all the gossiping. And she said, you know, my father had made a lot of money as a tradesman, enough to buy 4 parcels of land and build 4 cute little bungalows on them. And we were going to live in one of the houses, and he'd use the rest as an investment. And just when he was about to put up those for sale signs, the stock market crashed. And we all had to trundle back to 112th Street. And it was rough, she said. She said, my father was there at night, pounding nails into beer crates, trying to make a little money for us at a penny a crate, and it wasn't enough. And your grandfather, she said, looked at me. She said, your grandfather helped us because my father heard of a job he could get on a road crew. If it would snow, the men would sit on the back of the truck and they'd shovel off some ash and sand onto the street. Can you imagine working like that? Terrible work, but it meant good cash in his pocket. And he really wanted this job, but we didn't have a phone. He had to get a phone call at 4 a.m. for this job. And your grandfather stood up and said, I'll take the phone call. And that meant that your grandfather had to get a phone call in a house full of kids and probably walk all the way down in the front hall where his phone was at 4 a.m, wake everybody up, put on his coat and his hat, his boots in a snowstorm, and walk the 4 blocks across the tracks and over to our house just so that my dad could have a job that day. She said, we probably wouldn't have made it if it weren't for your grandfather and for all the family. We would all help each other out like that. And I'd never heard this story before. I'd never really had heard Nancy wax so poetic. And as we sat there in Union Station, maybe it went black and white again. And I felt like I was there with her back in the day. And I walked up and bought her a little bun for her to take up to her sister, because I knew they'd need a little bit of soda bread to do the dishing themselves. And I set her back on the train. And then I don't know what happened next. I need the last line. But
yeah, no, that's good. That's good. That's exactly how these are supposed to go.
I set her back on the train, happy with the thought that I didn't give away one thing that my mother might hear, and I got something myself or something like that.
Yeah. That was fantastic. I'm really impressed. The scene was set, and it was just that time it was a little faster. It was just under 5 minutes. Yeah, that was really cool how well you were able to incorporate some of the subtle things that people said into it right away and iterate on it. So this brings us to the end of our show. We're going to hear one more story, and it's going to be today from Mac. And
Yep.
what he's going to do. Do you want to explain it, Mac?
No, why don't you explain it, Dan?
So what Mac is going to do is he's going to tell one of the 2 stories that he heard today as though he himself had lived it. And that is a cool thing, hopefully, for at least two reasons. Two reasons that we emphasize. One of them is for the person who told the story, it's really cool to hear the experience you lived, and it makes you feel heard and validated to have someone tell your story, and you notice little things about it. And the second part is our emphasis on this idea of these stories can have multiple frames, but also voice matters. And it's hard to talk about voice and explain what voice is, but this gives you a concrete way of seeing and hearing and feeling how much voice changes a story. The voice is the unique thing that you bring to any story that nobody else can do. And it really changes it. You can hear the same story told by two different people, and it can be very, very different. So without further ado.
So I'm on the train, and I'm going to be stopping in Chicago and see my niece Miriam. But she's not really my niece, but she calls me Aunt Nancy, and I really love her to death. But the other thing I love about this is, well, she's living in the big city, and she left Cleveland, and I always come back with some really good information to share with everybody else. So I get off the train, and this swirl of smoke, and I'm looking for, I don't see so good. I'm 80 years old now, but there she is. And I'm dressed to the nines. I got my pillbox hat on. I got my favorite overcoat, and I got this suitcase that is, it's gone everywhere with me. And she snatches me up, and she gets me to sit down. We've only got a couple of hours. And I fill her in on everything that's going on in Cleveland, and I can see how excited she is about that. Now, this is kind of a family tradition for us, because back in the day, we didn't have this fancy internet-y kind of stuff. We basically moved all the information, gossip, and everything around the family, and we're pretty good at that. My sisters, they were twins, they'd show up at like Miriam's house, and they'd have soda bread, and that was always the sign that they wanted to come inside. And they'd sit down, and they would pump Miriam and her whole family for information, and they got some really good juicy things. Not everything we knew, but a lot of good things. So we were pretty good at that. We were good at information, and I should just say I provided a lot of entertainment for the family too. I went to clown school, and we gathered together for our softball games, and I was always there, kicking everything off. I just loved being part of the family. So Miriam and I talked, and we sat there for quite a while, and then she surprised me. She asked me a question. She said, "What was life like back in the 1920s when you were growing up as a girl?" Well, there's certain things that we didn't often talk about in our families, but I'm getting to be 80 years old, and I want people to know what it was like. And I wanted her to know about, what I wanted to tell her, and I told her, was that my father was a tradesman, and he had gotten quite successful, and he had some money, and he built 4 bungalows side by side in Cleveland, and we're going to live in one and rent the others. And then the stock market crashed, and we pretty much lost everything. We had to move back, and he didn't have a job. The only thing he could do is he'd get these beer crates, and he'd have to nail them together for like a penny a crate. That wasn't enough to get by. He had a family. But he heard about a job, and he could get a job because he had a relative working there with on the back of the snowplows. They would have guys actually shoveling ashes and sand after the road had been cleared onto the road. It was a terrible job. It was awful, but it paid good money. But there was a problem. See, we didn't have a phone in our house, and he'd have to get a call 4 o'clock in the morning to show up for work. Otherwise, it was out of the question. Well, your grandfather, I told Miriam this, said he would take the call. And that meant for him to take the call, it meant that phone would ring down in the hall, wake up the whole household. The kids' babies would start crying and everything. And he'd have to go downstairs. And if that call was, the call would be for my father to get on the back of that truck, he would have to get all dressed, put everything on, his boots and everything, and slog through a snow. Usually it was a blizzard. We had real snowstorms back then. And he'd have to get my dad out of bed to show up. And you know, I told Miriam, we really looked out for each other. We really did. And that's why it's always been important to me to hold this family together. Even if I have to act like a clown sometimes or really keep the gossip going. But that niece of mine, she bought me a bun and she put me on the train to see my sister. And, you know, I think the family's going to be all right. I think they're going to make it through thick and thin, just like we all made it through, because we're still a family, a big family. And we still do look out for each other. Oh.
Thank you so much.
I'm almost crying. Thanks,
That was
Matt.
really good. Yeah.
I didn't quite know what else to do
That's-
with it, Miriam. It's such a beautiful story. I didn't
Can't
want
cry.
to screw with it too much. So
That was so
No,
sweet.
that's great. Thank you everybody in chat. Thank you everybody who watched on Facebook and whom will watch in the next day or two. There's a Discord that has been sent to the link. You're welcome to hang out with us. We're gonna hang out there for a few minutes and talk about stories and whatever. Thank you so much, and this is the end of the stream. Can everybody say goodbye?
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
everyone.
Have a happy,
Bye.
happy holiday.
Happy
Bye.
holidays.